branches or olive plants around the table. The children decorate the home. You know, they will bring joy and happiness. There's nothing more beautiful than seeing a family sit around the table and enjoy a meal together. Something that Linda and I did from the time our children were small, we played a game in every meal. Cooperray, Racco, Can't Stop, or Cheesy, Chinese, checkers, all of them. And so instead of a 15-minute chow it down, it was an hour meal. We discussed a lot of things, and people would come by and they were amazed. And we had some families over, and we let them play games with us when we ate with them. You know, when I first came here, and I told them, you know, if you let me cook on Sunday, and for the first several years when my daughter was still living, we would have, and our kids were, and my grandkids were in high school, we would have 20 to 25 every Sunday. Table in the living room, table in the kitchen, and then we set a table in the hallway where you go upstairs. Sit around and talk. That was a wonderful, wonderful time. You know, and children adorn the home. Verse 4, blessed that this man shall be, that as blessed, he shall be blessed that feareth the Lord. I read that wrong. Pay close attention. The man who fears the Lord will be greatly blessed. Well-established fact. Verse 5, the Lord shall bless thee out of Zion, and thou shalt see the good of Jerusalem all the days of thy life. The Holy Temple was situate in Jerusalem, and when things were well in the temple, things were well in the city, and when there was peace in Jerusalem, there was peace in all of Israel. That's the reason we should pray for the peace of Jerusalem today. Things, I found out, when things were going right in the church, things were basically going right in the families of the church also. You shall see the good of Jerusalem all thy days. You know, and you will thank God for those blessings that he gives. Verse 6, yea, thou shalt see thy children's children, and peace upon Jerusalem. God will give you long life, and you will be able to enjoy not only your children, but your grandchildren. Peace will be experienced. My oldest granddaughter and her husband and little boy, my great-grandson, who was 19, 20 months old, came last Sunday. They were going to come to Sunday school. We didn't have Sunday school. But, you know, William, they opened the front door and showed that it was snowing. So he came and got my finger for me to go with him to see the snow outside. I tell you, he brought a lot of joy on Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday, you know, and on Monday before he went home. And that children, you know, that are properly trained, bring such blessing to the home. End of point 1, anything you want to add or ask? I'm sure there are a lot of testimonies that you could give. Point 2, discipline and instruction. Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he shall not depart from it. Parents should be extra careful to train and discipline their children in the tender years of youth. If a child is properly trained in the tender years of his life, Solomon said he shall not depart from it. Note, this is the Word of God. We have some issues with Solomon, but when he wrote this book, he must have been right with God because it's inspired of God. And he said training includes both instruction and discipline. Catechize, or the catechisms in the Catholic Church, you know what they are? Question and answer, period. And that's important. Children have a lot of questions. Rob had a lot of questions. Patty had a lot of questions. And a lot of pastors, I've heard them say, I never discussed any of the issues of my church, with my family. Well, I plead guilty then. But issues that affected us, them. And so we often shared with them that. And then when they asked questions, my son couldn't play Little League because it was on Sunday. And we had to explain that to him. We should train them like soldiers. Teach them, how to defend themselves spiritually. Teach them how to follow orders and keep rank. And I think about D.R. Morgan. I mention him quite often. And he would always talk about keeping rank, keeping in step, not getting out of step. We should teach them to follow commandments and the statutes of God. Train up children in the way that they should go, and when they are old, they shall not depart from it. I wrote down here, on my Bible hub, at this time when I was studying, it said that I should order Bible cheat sheets. And I thought, Bible cheat sheets? And I wrote it down there. I don't need them. That word, to depart means to easily or ordinarily leave the way that you have been taught. Rarely do men and women who have been taught in the ways of God depart from the good way to walk the bad way. Good impressions made upon children by godly parents will have a lasting effect upon them. Early training often brings a child that strays back to the fold later on in life. And that's a promise that we need to, that I hung on to, and I still hang on to it for my children, my grandchildren, and my great-grandchildren. Proverbs 22:15. Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction shall drive it from him. Now, foolishness means to lack good sense. It's firmly fixed in a child. Children do foolish things. A child, is conceived with the Adamic sin nature. And Solomon says that foolishness needs to be driven out of the mind and the emotions of children. The rod of correction refers to parental discipline that is designed to correct the child so that he or she does not develop bad habits that will affect them all of their life. He says that we need to drive foolishness from the heart of our children with the rod of correction. Now, my mother told me my dad was drafted. And so my first 3 years of life, till Dad came back from Germany, I lived at my grandparents' home. Uncle Sam lived there. He wasn't married yet, and my mother and I. And there's a lot of things you can get in trouble with the farm. One time I climbed under the chicken coop and stayed there all day. And when it came out, I wouldn't answer. My grandfather was blind and he was yelling for me, and my grandmother only had one leg, had an artificial leg. She checked the house, and Uncle Sam checked the barn and the ridge, and Mother the chicken coop and the corn coop. And when I come out, I asked for a dish of peaches. I got a whipping. Mother said, I looked at her and said, that didn't hurt. Said, she whipped me again. I said, that didn't hurt. Said, she whipped me again. She told me that every whipping she gave me when I was a young boy, it was not 1, but it was 2, 3, 4, 5. As stubborn as I am now, I'm glad she whipped me 3, 4, 5 times. That's what parents need to do. I remember some times that I, whipped my children, and now I'm grateful I did. Back then, after you do it, then you feel sorry for them. At least I did. Verse 15, I'll give you a chance to respond to that in a minute. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame. Solomon stressed the importance of training disobedient children. And some children are very passive, and there are others that are very rebellious. just by nature. And he stressed the importance. In Proverbs 13:24, he that spareth the rod hateth the son, but he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes. And that Hebrew word for betimes means promptly or as soon as he has committed the evil. Proverbs 23:13, withhold not correction from the child, for if thou beat him with the rod, he shall not die. The rod and the reproof give wisdom. You know, wisdom is the benefit of due correction. Parents need to tell their children what is right, what is wrong, and also chide them when they do wrong. You know, at times, reproof is enough to correct them. But sometimes, it took the belt or the rod. I went to a one-room school, and the teacher would give you a knife, and you had to go to the woods down behind the school and cut a switch. If it broke within 5 times of them hitting you, then you had to go get another one. Thank the Lord, I didn't have to have any of those. I saw a lot of people whipped, and I knew that if I got it at school, I was going to get it when I got home. And so, but I'm grateful for that correction. You know, it's very important. A child left to himself will bring his mother to shame. And that word shame can be also translated disappointment. It's amazing. That word left in the Hebrew is shalmah. And it's used in Job 39:5, referring to a wild ass that is left to itself in the wilderness. And I thought, you know, Solomon is saying a child left to himself will bring shame. Let's go to Ephesians chapter 6:4. And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Now he talks to parents about parental duties. Do not provoke your child. And that Greek word is a long word, and it means to arouse them to wrath, or provoke them, to exasperate them, to anger them. That's a present imperative verb, which is a command. Children is techno, which means children of all ages. Bring them up in the nurture of the Lord. You know, nurture them from birth to maturity in the training of the Lord. And that's paideia, which means a tutor. You know, this word was used of rich people that would send their children to a tutor who would train them, not only in ABCs, but in how to conduct themselves, how to live, how to act. And he was also given the privilege to use the rod, if necessary, to correct them. And he said, and Paul is saying, bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. Now, I'm through with point 2. Anything you'd like to ask or add? Any testimonies? Okay, let's move to point 3, Hebrews. The purpose for divine correction. Now, we're going to speak a little more to us at our age today. You know, we're not raising children, you know, and sometimes we try to raise our grandchildren, but we have to, you know, give way to their parents, let them handle it the way they would handle it. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 5. And ye have forgotten the exhortation which speaketh unto you as unto children. My son, despise not thou the chastening of the Lord, nor faint when thou art rebuked of him. Now, my Cole asked me, you know, who did I think wrote the book of Hebrews? My opinion, this is just my guess, is Priscilla. I know it's not Paul. It's not his Greek, not his structure. And the reference that the writer of Hebrews makes is to Proverbs 31 and following. Have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as children? And that exhortation is, a personal word of encouragement or admonition. And that children there and sons, it's the same Greek word, huros, do not despise the chastenings of the Lord. And that word despise means to think little of or to regard as nothing the chastisement of the Lord. Literally, and that's the total training. Don't despise the times that the Lord chastens you. It's a very vital part of our duty as parents to correct our children. Our Heavenly Father also corrects us, His sons and daughters. He corrects us when we do wrong. Do not think when thou art reproved of the Lord. That is, don't go weak, don't lose your strength when you're reproved. And that word there means to be punished or admonished of the Lord. When God gives us a good licking, we need to accept it as necessary. I don't know whether you ever use, that's the word they used when I was in grade school, licking. I recall a time, I was thinking about this morning, that when I really got corrected with the Lord. I was standing in Acme. It was, we had been at Levittown. I hadn't been able to build a church yet. Couldn't find a building. We met Sunday afternoons, had prayer meeting in our home. And I didn't have a lot of money. I was substituting $18 a day. And there wasn't much coming into church. And I was complaining. I couldn't buy what I wanted to buy for my kids. And I said, this is not worth it. And I was thinking about leaving the ministry. And one of those pity parties that you probably never had, but I've had a few of them. And I saw a man standing in front of me with hands so wrinkled and broken. I mean, he'd worked hard. And the Lord, through my spirit, said, look at your hands. I took a good whipping. He corrected me. I didn't do much complaining for several weeks after that. Because, there are a lot of times that God has corrected us. And we shouldn't grow faint when God cares about us enough to correct us. Verse 6. For whom the Lord loveth, He chasteneth, and scourges every son that He receiveth. Cambridge called this the blessedness of being trained by the Lord. And I like that. The Lord chastens those that He loves. And that word is agape. I had one of my members come up to me when I preached on this verse in church, and she said, the Lord must really love me. And I said, why is that? She said, He chastens me a lot. And I looked at her and I said, me too. If the Lord loves us, He chastens us. He scourges every son that He receives. And that means there is to punish them harshly. To correct them. I heard a minister, one of the Jamaican pastors, he called that education from the sitter. When we've been spanked. And we remember that. And the Lord scourges those that He loves. He scourges us through sickness, through plagues, through misfortunes. There's a lot of correction that God does. And a lot of times we never understand why. I look back and, for some reason the Lord took my wife at a young age, 66. I had to quit pastoring 4 years before I planned on it. God had a reason. I don't know what that reason was. But when God scourges us, we need to accept it. Did I get angry at God? No. I was disappointed in God. And when my daughter died, I thought it was not fair. A lot of us here have lost a mate. Many of us have lost a child. It's not easy. But the Lord loves us. And for some reason, He allows those things to come our way. Verse 7. If ye endure chastening, God dealeth with you as with sons. For whom son is it that the father chasteneth not? You know, and if you endure, that Greek word there is hupomeno, which means to bear up calmly and bravely when you're being tried and tested for your faith. You don't give up. You don't blow out. You continue faithfully on. For what son is there whose father has not corrected him? You know, and what child of God has not been corrected of him? Verse 8. But if ye be without chastisement, whereof we are all partakers, then you are bastards and not sons. You know, if you're not chastened like the rest of, the writer said, if you're not chastened like the rest of us are chastened, then you are not a true son. You're a bastard. Now, that word bastard, the Greek word is N-O-T-H-O-I. Illegitimate, bastard, one born out of unlawful wedlock, one born of a concubine or a girlfriend. You know, and a true child, you know, the parents, you know, want them to represent them well. But a child that is born of an harlot, illegitimately, you know, they often say, well, you know, let him go. He's not going to make anything out of his life. I think about a boy in my hometown. His name was Robert Lineweaver. His dad was an older man by the name of Eckenrode Lineweaver. What a name. You know, and he lived with a young lady that had Robert. You know, and I'd often hear them say, don't worry about him. He'll be as rotten as his dad was. And beside that, Robert had a hair lip. You know, and everybody made fun of him. I even heard him call that word bastard a few times. And so, you know, it was happening in the bus one day, and so I said, Robert, you come sit with me, and anybody that's got a problem with him, you've got to go through me. But, you know, he was just considered, you know, as a boy that was never going to make anything. He wouldn't graduate from high school. You know, he'd never make anything out of himself. And what the writer of Hebrews is saying, if God doesn't chasten you, you know, he considers you as unworthy of sonship or daughtership. Anything you want to say on that? That's a little harsh. Verse 9. Furthermore, we have had fathers of our flesh which corrected us, and we gave them reverence. Shall we not much rather be in subjection unto the Father of spirits and live? He said, now, we've had fathers who corrected us, and we do them reverence. We respect them because they cared enough about us to correct evil habits. You know, I knew that if I ever brought the smell of smoke on my body home, I was in trouble. Never smoked a cigarette. And the reason was I knew what would happen if I did. You know, and I respect my parents. My dad gave me several good whippings. Some of them I thought I didn't deserve. You know, but he felt I deserved them. You know, I think about Ron Corey. And Ron, you know, sometimes he's one of the great leaders in the Levittown Church. If you saw that building on there, that was a gymnatorium that I built that I was pastoring before I came here. And his dad was rough. Man, he was rough. And he was a chimney sweep. And Ron and Randy would go with their dad. And Ron said we'd be riding down the road, and his dad ring and say, you boys need a whipping. He'd just pull over and give him a good whipping. Ron said, we didn't know what we had done. So I got a lot of whippings, but I didn't know what I'd done. You know, the whippings we get from God, you know, God has a purpose. God has a reason. You know, and those that he loves enough to correct, you know, we should respect him. He draws a comparison. If you respect your parents because they corrected you, so much more should you respect the Spirit, the God of spirits. Let me read it from here. That be in subjection unto the Father of spirits and live. Now, I don't want to get into this discussion because I'm not prepared, but this is the verse that created the great divide between creationism and traducianism. Whether the soul and spirit was created by the parents, traducianism, or whether creationism, God created the spirits and somehow kept them and then placed them in the womb when the seed of man and woman came together. You know, but that's where this came in, the great discussion. Verse 10, for they verily for a few days chastened us after their own pleasure, but he for our profit, that we might be partakers of his holiness. They corrected us for a few days, and that refers to the time that we were under the umbrella of parenting. You know, they did what they thought was right. But God chastened us for our benefit, that we might be partakers of his holiness. You know, the prophet means to bring all things together. You know, the prophet is that we receive his holiness. Verse 11. Now no chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby. You know, there's no joy when you're getting corrected. But afterwards it brings the peaceful fruit of righteousness. Righteousness is the fruit of them that were corrected by God. And this is practical holiness. You know, God, you know, took time for each one of us to prepare us. You know, I think about, you know, from my upbringing, you know, what the things that God has taught me, you know, through his correction, you know, and it was not easy at times to accept the correction of God, but God corrected me. You know, I think oftentimes, you know, we don't think about, you know, the finished product of correction. We think about how we were chastened or how we were corrected. You know, but correction by God always brings fruit. Next week we're going to deal with the responsibility of children to parents. Now, anything you want to ask or add? Joe Linda.
Praise the Lord.
It's on.
Praise the Lord. In our time when we raised our children, I think it was, I don't know if we could say it was easier, the discipline. I used to have a little belt hanging, and I would tell my sons, if you disobey or do something wrong, I'm going to get the belt. It's hanging right there, you know. And we would use different tactics, you know, for raising. But in this time that we're living, and I don't have the experience of raising children in this time, is protecting children in a digital world. The online gaming, the social media, and other internet devices are potential threats. And I could name all the threats, but I won't go into that. It's really as the two parents have to work out now. And the children are sometimes just alone in the house. And they have an open door to do, no one's watching them, supervising them. Like it used to be in our times, there was always somebody watching the little ones. grandparents, not only the parents, the grandparents, but in this world, a comparison of our times and the times that we're living now, what would you say, Pastor Garner, about protecting children in a digital world?
I agree with you. It's much more difficult today. You know, and I think it takes a lot more prayer, a lot more effort. You know, and I worry about my grandson that I request prayer for often, Cole. He's probably going to go to a group home. You know, but, you know, the correction that he would have gotten from his mother wasn't there. And I often ask God, why? And a lot of his problems were a lot of things that he saw on his phone. And a lot of the things that he says, you know, are not really from his heart, but from what someone has told him. You know, and I agree with you. And that's the reason I think we should pray for our, you know, our grandchildren, great-grandchildren, their parents. You know, and it worries me, you know, a lot of them don't go to Sunday school. You know, a lot don't have the training that, you know, that our kids had, you know. But I agree with you. Parenting is not easy. It's tough then. It's tougher now.
They don't go to Sunday school because churches don't.
I agree. That's what I'm saying. Levittown doesn't have Sunday school. You know, they got, well, you know.
This church does.
We got a former Sunday school and youth national director here, and he still believes in Sunday school. Dr. Betts. But I think it takes a lot of effort. All right. Our time is running out. So God bless you, and I hope you have a good week.